So let's dive into the Beatles. So the album is With the Beatles. This comes out in 1963. So there's 5 albums from the Beatles that are generally considered 5 of the greatest albums of all time. So I'm going to read through them. So normally on those lists, you see Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the Beatles, also known as the White Album, and Let It Be. So why is With the Beatles your choice of all their they have such great albums, maybe the greatest songwriters of all time. Why this album specifically?
I'll take this first one away.
Okay.
In the beginning of the band, one other thing is, and you can take this album away. Who knows that the Dreamboats would have started too? Was that we had this like book called the Beatles Chords Songbook. I'm not sure if we touched on this the last time we were talking, Joel, but we loved all these specific songs, the songs that they even introduced me to. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is an awesome Beatles song. And we started playing a lot of these specific early Beatles songs that we all kind of knew mutually and performed together. And a lot of those songs that were my favorite in the beginning stages of the Dreamboats were off of this album right here. Like Roll Over Beethoven, Mr. Postman, till There Was You,
All My Lovin'.
We
played that.
Money, that's what I want.
Yeah, Money.
Yeah, once we got on Devil in Her Heart. Oh my gosh, Really Got a Hold on Me. Roll Over Beethoven. We used to end the first set with Roll Over Beethoven every time. It was like Johnny B. Good Jr.
We still play You Really Got a Hold on Me to this day. Mr. Postman played it last night.
So he was like, even though it was like a cover like show tune, there's like that reminds me of my grandma every time I listen to it. I feel like it's gonna bring a tear to my eye. I love that song so much.
All of these, It Won't Be Long, the first song on the album. The best part of It Won't Be Long is the ending, which is crazy. And fun fact is that the Sheepdogs end one of their albums with like they end the whole album with like a similar kind of ending to the song It Won't Be Long. I remember listening to it and I'm like, they know what's up.
You know where the influence is on that.
At least I think it sounds very Beatle-esque. So
Lennon.
Yeah, like we're just looking at the track listing again.
All I've got to do. Oh man, that song is so smooth. Like that's all like listen to that groove of All I Gotta Do. Tell me that isn't like that. Like it's not like it's like it's sick. It's like, and it does sound like a retro sounding, like I think it's so ahead of its time at that time, to be completely honest with you.
What's cool about these songs is that when we first were in the early days of the band, before we were even kind of an actual band, we would just like be in this guy's rehearsal space with his old band, and we'd be sitting down, they'd have the acoustic guitar, and we'd literally be going through the Beatles chord book, and we'd be like playing all these songs. So whether we played them as a full band or not, like all of these. The only one we probably didn't do is Little Child. Little Child. Yeah. Little Child. Come and dance with me.
Yeah.
So this album was a big deal for the Beatles because this is actually their first North American release. So this introduced the Beatles to the North American crowd. And it's funny, they gave it an augmented title. So it's With the Beatles in the UK, and when it came out here, it was Beatlemania ! With the Beatles. So yeah. I thought that was a funny thing to amp up,
Well, that's the thing, and that's the thing about the Beatles. There was a few releases, like I know with Rubber Soul, on the North American release, they changed 2 of the songs. I think they put I've Just Seen a Face on the American. Anyways, they changed 2 songs because they wanted it to sound a little more like Bob Dylan. So yeah, I guess that would have happened back in the day. When they bring it to North America, just judging by the crowds, they would change things a little bit, market it differently. So, and that's even when we were talking, like with the Beatles, Meet the Beatles. I'm like, there's too many Beatles, and I get confused even. But yeah, this one, we're just looking at the track listing
here. Is this boy on that too?
No, I don't know if This Boy, but I mean, all the early Beatles albums are huge, but this one specifically, like all of these tracks, we've had moments with.
It feels all right now. Hold me tight.
There you go. We're giving the fans more than they asked for with the live hearts. You had the warm. That's why you had the warm tea you were drinking, is you knew you were going to break into song and dance at some point. So the Beatles are the best-selling musical act in human history. So I think everyone just assumes that. They've sold 600 million albums.
Shit.
So the best-selling album of all time is Michael Jackson Thriller with 60 million. But then it's the Beatles, like they have so many individual albums that have sold 20 million, 30 million, and it's crazy. So this album itself, it sold 5 million. It's not the biggest of all the Beatles albums, but it was kind of the starting point where Beatlemania kicked in, their first album here in North America. Are the Beatles the greatest songwriters of all time? What do you think?
I mean, I think for pop songs, Lennon, McCartney, I mean, there's so many other great ones, but it goes beyond that so much, is that not only did they write the songs, but they played the songs and they played great parts. Like Paul McCartney, everyone thinks of him as like, you know, the greatest songwriter, but the guy's also like a killer bass player. You know what I mean? He's great. And all these guys were just able to do it all, you know, and for that reason, I feel like, you know, but so many other artists too. I know
the fact that you see a lot of pop stars or whatnot, and just out of curiosity, you hear like a great song, you know, that they're singing, you know what I mean? And I'll just like, and nothing against them. I want to collaborate more with other songwriters and do that. And I obviously cover songs for a living, so I'm not talking or taking knocks at anyone, but like, if we're talking about like the greatest performers, musicians, whatever you want to call it, all into like if we're talking the full package, you know what I mean? Like you get these guys that are writing songs about, we're still talking about and sing to this day. And you got them singing vocal ranges, harmonies that still blow, that we're still sitting down here trying to figure out, you know what I mean? It's just like, I mean, and you know, I'd like to think we putting some miles in our, you know, on as far as how much we played and how much we've tried to study the music that we love and whatnot. And these guys they're still like they're an anomaly. Like,
and they shaped culture at the end of the day. So even if people don't like Beatles songs per se, which is crazy, but
crazy.
Even if they don't, it's like the Beatles just shaped so much of the culture during such a pivotal point in modern, you know, pop culture, like history, you know, the 60s, the late 60s, especially. It's like the Beatles were all about that. They were talking about the things that were going on, using terms that people were using that were cool at the time. So
pushing the boundaries, just not really, you know, sticking true to themselves, you know, like reading in some of their books, just even a quick fact of just like, you know, like the whole, you know, the whole racial tensions, you know, back in the day of like separating, you know what I mean? Like, you know, the crowds and whatnot. And they're like, look, we're not playing those separate crowds. Like we're playing at one crowd or we're not playing like stuff like that. You know what I mean? And not really just conforming, you know, to the way things were at the time. And, you know, all those kind of weird things that were happening during that period in like America and stuff like that. And they're the best and they themselves, you know?
Yeah, and it's not just that you could take their songs just strictly as songwriters and they would match up against any other songs in human history. So it's not just that they might be flat out the greatest songwriters of all time. It's like you mentioned that they changed not just the music industry, but they changed the world. And before them, most performing artists didn't sing their own songs to start with. So here you have artists that actually were like, no, we don't need outside, you know, help. We can write our own songs. So that changed music because people started to realize that they could write their own songs. Before the Beatles, songs were do 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 do, like they didn't mean anything. It's what was catchy, what could we dance to, you know, tutti frutti all a Rudy. And then you have the Beatles that have something to say, and that changed things along with Bob Dylan and other artists. And then there's also that before the Beatles, the music industry was all about singles. And the Beatles were the first act that had enough songs that people wanted to buy a full album because there was enough great music. And the Beatles changed the music industry from being single driven to being album driven, which is a lot more lucrative because people are paying for 10 or more songs versus just one song. So they completely changed the music industry. And then I believe they were the first artists playing in arenas and stadiums. So they changed the live touring industry. So all of that combined with just the fact that their songs are as good as anyone else's songs in human history, I think you'd probably have to say that they're the greatest songwriters of all time. I know you're not going to give me any pushback because you're bigger Beatles fans than I am. So
you're saying some awesome points. Like you said, when it even came to like these amps are too small, Vox, you know, we got to get some, and then creating all these things that they're the ones that put themselves in these situations that like that, you know, demanded more from their stage performances, and you're absolutely right, man. Like you nailed it on the head right there. There's so many different
can't
things.
deny,
you
yeah.
can't deny all these things that they accomplish or pushed through or made groundbreaking. You know what I mean? Even like when it comes to the recording, like their style of recording, the studio, when they just decided to become, after the whole touring incident in the Philippines, they're like we had enough of this. we're gonna go and become just studio musicians. You know what I mean? And they push that to the next level too.
That's true. Yeah, I didn't even mention how they changed actual recorded music in recording studios and all that stuff. So, man, we could talk about just the Beatles
on them all day
for the full 2 hours. So, a few more things about the Beatles, and we'll move on to the next album. So, in my last interview, I interviewed Matt Starr, who's the drummer for Sarah McLachlan and Buffy Sainte Marie, and he's played with Lisa Loeb, and he drummed with Chris Shiflett of the Foo Fighters. So this guy is super legit. And he was saying that it was hearing the Beatles as a kid that inspired him to become a drummer. So like Ringo Starr inspired him. And you guys are multi-instrumentalists, but you guys are both great drummers. Did the Beatles inspire you to start the drums? Or were they one of your early influences with Ringo?
My earliest influence I love Ringo too. Of course, I always looked at the time, the Beatles as a whole, not necessarily like as individuals until I started getting to the band and seeing who was singing what and the individuality. But when it came to inspiring for drums, I just remember getting my mind blown when I saw Trey Cool play basket case with those 30-second note rolls across the toms. I was just like, what the hell is that? And like, that was like my whole, I guess, inspiration when it came to playing drums.
Okay. How about you, Johnny?
I mean, I was big into like 90s drummers too, like big Chad Smith guy and like, Matt Cameron and stuff. But when I was first learning the drums, I mean, I was self-taught, but I remember I had my drum set there and we had our stereo kind of next to it, my brother's stereo. And I remember listening to Sgt. Pepper, and I would like play along to like Sgt. Pepper because there's no real hi-hats. It was like a boom, 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 boom. I remember showing my neighbor Simon. I was like, hey, I can play the drums. I was playing on. So like the Ringo beats were although you later learn that they're very intricate and they can be very tough to nail in terms of feel. But there's also a lot of really cool Ringo parts that are easy, great for beginners. It's just about adding that flavor that makes it different. But Ringo definitely played a role in the early drumming anyways. For sure.
One cool thing about Trey Cool is he actually legally changed his name. So his kids are like Sean Cool and like Mary Cool. So that's like a real last name now that their kids moving forward. The Cool last name moves on through generations.
So Frank Edwin Wright III is his real name.
Yeah, imagine his kids had the hyphen names like Cool McDonald.
Yeah. That's awesome. One thing I noticed with the Beatles album and probably all the Beatles albums is all the songs are like 2 minutes, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes. So it is like all killer, no filler. They're a great example of like straight to the point. There's no insane musical breaks, like maybe on later albums, but on this album, it was, this is it. It's almost like you start with the singing. Like you don't have, it's so I thought that was very cool.
There's no dead time. And what I always say about the Beatles is that they always like take time to do a proper ending. Like even if the song is kind of the same, the ending will have like one little change in the chord, or like there's always something to keep you right till the end, even though it's already like short as it is. They get you right till the end. They never give up an opportunity to have a good ending.
Those are the best songs though. If you can have it like 2 minutes 30 seconds of all killing no filler, like trust me, you're gonna be putting that thing on repeat. You're gonna be playing it a few times.
Yeah, it's almost too short. You
get addicted.
So one more thing about the Beatles and we'll move on to the next album. So their album before this, Please Please Me, had been #1 for 30 weeks. So it's like half a year. The Beatles are just at #1. And then With the Beatles comes out and knocked Please Please Me out of the #1 spot and stayed there for 21 weeks. So the Beatles, period, the band was #1 for 51 weeks. So 1 week shy of an entire year. And still to this day, there's no artists in human history outside of them that have basically locked down the #1 album for essentially an entire year. So
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, wow, unbelievable.
Can you imagine like every week there's 5 to 10 big like major label albums that come out every single week. Like every Friday I check the list and I listen to 7 new albums. So can you imagine staving off every week 5 to 10 other massive major label albums for an entire year? Like it doesn't even make sense.
Really, that's something that's a dream. You know what I mean? That's insane. Wow.